see some old friends, and this only gentleman I don't know.
Yeah, Eric Brooks.
Hi, Eric. My name's Dean
And
Bonifacio.
now the train goes by.
All right, meet you. And so Dave asked me to talk a little bit about the history of the store and our family. I am no historian, and I look back, history is one of those things you wish you had asked the questions when you were younger. I wish I had asked my grandma how she made her pasta too. There's just so many things. So I just started looking here. I just tell you a little about our family. They were Italian immigrants. Sam and Maria Bonifacio, like so many immigrants that came to southern West Virginia because of coal mining, where they were coal miners or related work. My grandfather was a shoemaker. He was a cobbler. And so he came to America, and then he sent for his wife, my grandmother, Maria Bonifacio, and she arrived here in 1914. And when she came here, she was 26 years old. She had 3 children with her when she came. Her firstborn, who was Julius Bonifacio. If you know Richard or Tom, that's their dad. He worked in here for years. He was 3 years old. My Aunt Rosina, her first girl, and then there was a 12-year-old stepson. His name was Paul. And so they came, and where they were headed to was Glen Jean, because that's where my grandfather was. He had settled in Glen Jean because when he came to New York, they had told him, go to West Virginia. The coal miners need shoes, and he was a cobbler. So he came here to Glen Jean, and then in 1920 they came here to Mount Hope and started Mount Hope, here at Mount Hope, and started a Bonbon store. And it was Bonbon's confectionery, and they had they had the shoe shop, so they were still doing shoe repair. My dad is Floyd Bonifacio, and of course my dad has passed away, and all his my uncles and aunts have passed away. They're all gone now, but my dad was the youngest, and so his first job was to shine shoes. So that's how he got his start in Mount Hope. He was shining shoes as my Uncle Julius and my Uncle Paul and my grandfather were making shoes or repairing them. That's what they did. But I can just imagine, like so many immigrants, what it took to come to this country. When you're 26 years old, as a young lady with 3 kids, and you speak Italian, and you're coming to America. And somebody asked me today, said, well, did they speak a lot of Italian when you were growing up? A little bit broken, but most of it was they spoke English because they wanted to be American. They loved this country, and they wanted to speak American English. So anyway, they got the store going here. My grandfather, all he did was work. I heard stories of him selling popcorn out here on the street corner when people would go by. And so I remember looking through the history of like a 1930 census, and in it would list how many hours you worked a week. And his was like 90 hours a week. It's like, worked, slept, worked. That was all they did. There was no vacations or anything like that. So I thought that was interesting. And so he passed away in March of 1941 at the age of 65. He actually had a heart attack, and that's how he passed away. So in 1941, he passes away in March that year, and then my grandmother, Maria, takes over as the boss. And she got all the kids. She had 9 children. 2 of them passed away when they were younger, but between my uncles and my aunts and my dad, that's who ran the store. Your family was your business, and it was a unique place. They lived upstairs, and so where they lived and where they worked was the same location. And so he passed away in 1941, March of that year. By December of that year, Pearl Harbor. And then what happens is every young man who's capable had to go fight the war. So there was Julius, my Uncle Oogie, and my dad Floyd, who all went to the service. That left the girls to run the business. So that's who ran the business for years while they were off in Europe. My dad was in the Pacific. And then once it was over, Mount Hope was a booming town. Coal was booming, and the store was booming too. I have a picture here. You guys can come up here in a little bit maybe and take a look at that. It shows you how the booths used to be in here, and I would hear stories about, of course this was before I was born, but stories where town was so busy and people walking the streets that, like on a Friday, Saturday night, that they would be so busy in here, they would have to lock the door just to, hey, we need to wait on the customers here, just so we can go home tonight and get a little rest. But this is a neat photo. It shows the booths that used to be back here. One of the neat things I always thought too, when you look at this picture, there was these booths that were all around. And there was like this button that was right here. And one of them is still here, this little button. And one of those buttons was at every booth. So if you were sitting in that booth and they sold beer and so we're sitting there at the booth and you wanted a couple more beers, you'd hit that button. And right back here, there was a little box. And the little indicator would come on it wasn't a light, it would just make it white looking. And it would say, someone in booth number 2 wants waited. So that they would be able to go wait on it. And that was a way they could take care of people. So that was a cool things on that. I also have this here. It's a hard article to read, but it talks about the building right next to us. And it was actually the People's Provision Company. And this picture was taken in December 1910. And then Mr. Yapple it was like a grocery store. It sold meats and produce. And one of the neat things in it, it said one of the best refrigerators in the county. So that's what was important. Yeah. Somebody had refrigeration. And I remember reading another article about my grandmother. Somebody did back in the 70s, of all the inventions and things that she saw changing in her life. One of the things that she thought was the greatest was the washing machine. So she was no longer doing it by hand. So after the war, my dad comes back, and that was the only time he ever left Mount Hope to serve in the country, serve our country. And so he comes back, and he works in the store all the time. He starts expanding. They bought the other next 2 buildings we have here, and he opened up hardware in that last building down there. He also got into the theater business. He rented the Princess Theater, ran it for years, and then he ended up purchasing the Mount Hope Theater and ran it for years. So he had them both going at the same time. One of the things folks will say, well, how do you survive? How do you make a business work for 100 years? Well, I think in their case anyway, dedication and hard work, customer service. The folks who came in here, they knew them by name. You knew everybody's coming in. There was a lot of times where we never took credit cards, but there was a lot of little white pieces of paper. Well, actually, we sold cigarettes for years, and one of the main stationaries I remember was tearing a cigarette carton apart, and that would be our stationery. And so you may write on it. Somebody would come in and be 25 cents short or something, and you just write a little note on that and set it in the cash register. And the cash register wasn't the kind that ran a big tape at the end of your day of work that you would run it and see how much you made. All it took was you just hit a button, the drawer open, because we were all family working here. And But Dad, growing up, you know, all my dad did was work 7 days a week, 364 days a week. He got off 1 day a year. That was Christmas. But I can remember my brother Doug and my other brother Rock being home, and we had great Christmases. But I can remember us being home, and there'd be a knock on the door, and there would be someone coming to the door and saying, Floyd, I bought my kid this toy for Christmas, and I didn't realize they didn't have batteries with it. So he would come down to the store and open up and sell them the batteries. And sometimes that would go on that little charge code and just in there. Hope they would come back again next week and pay it. Or maybe they had a water leak. So, you know, he was dedicated to Mount Hope. Whether it was selling plumbing or whatever. So he went on. He loved Mount Hope. He got into city administration. He became a city recorder. Then he went on and became a councilman, and he served as mayor for 12 years. So he loved Mount Hope. And he passed away in 2011. And then after that, my brother Doug and I have been worked with my mom. We kept the doors open, and her health declined. And in 2018, we finally had to close the front doors. Her health had declined to the point where we just couldn't keep things going. And so we closed those doors. But I knew that we were so close to being in business for 100 years that we continue to operate these pop machines that were outside here. Because I wanted to be able to say that we were in business for 100 years. So just like my grandfather was selling that popcorn out there almost 100 years before, we were still selling that soda pop out of the machines. And so we kept them going till year 2020, and finally we called it quits. And so here we are today. We were lucky that we did the American Picker Show. We contacted them, and they surprisingly they said, "Yeah, we'd like to do a show here." And so we did that. And then this past year, back in January, we had an online auction. We've sold a lot of things, and now it brings us to today, where we are now selling the property, and we're working with Foxfire Realty. It is a great opportunity. What we're selling is actually a whole block of property here. We have 3 buildings. Up above us, the residence where my dad was born, is a whole home up there. There's 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room, a whole house up there. And then there's 5 apartments over this second building, and they're actively being rented. Hopefully by next week, all 5 will be rented. Right now, 4 of the 5 are rented. We've done some remodeling to them, so there's some income coming. And along with that, there are 3 houses in the back too that are part of this property sale. One of the houses is where we grew up, Doug and I grew up, and then there's 2 other houses. All 3 of those are being rented now too. So there's rental property that's already active or is active right now. And we're looking for someone to come in and take it for the next 100 years. We believe with the national park, just our location, that there's a great opportunity, and Mount Hope has some really good years still left with it. But I'd say that's kind of it in a nutshell. If you guys have any questions, I'll try, or Doug will try to answer them. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.